There comes a moment in every person's life when they look in the mirror and realize something powerful. The story they've been telling themselves is either pushing them forward or holding them prisoner. And the truth is, most people don't even recognize the chains because they forged them one quiet belief at a time. I'm not good enough, I'm too old, I'm too late, I always fail. That story becomes the script of their life, and they live it on repeat without ever questioning who wrote it in the first place. But today, right now, something changes. Because the moment you decide to take back the pen, the moment you declare that your past is not your future, everything shifts. Your energy rises, your vision expands, your soul wakes up to what's possible. You're not here to survive, you're here to create, to break patterns, to rewrite the meaning of every moment that came before. And when you change the meaning, you change the emotion. And when you change the emotion, you change the action. That's how a new life begins. Not with a miracle, not with luck, but with a decision to step into a new story that empowers you, strengthens you, and pulls you toward the life you know you were built for. Today, you're not waiting for permission. You're reclaiming your narrative. Because when you change your story, you don't just change your life, you transform your destiny. Your story shapes your identity, and identity drives every action you take because every belief, memory, and interpretation you hold becomes the lens through which you see yourself and the world. Most people think their life is shaped by circumstances, but in truth, it's shaped by the meaning they attach to those circumstances. Two people can face the same hardship, the same loss, the same disappointment, yet one rises stronger while the other collapses. The difference isn't in the event, it's in the story they tell themselves about what the event means. Your story becomes your internal blueprint, silently guiding what you believe you deserve, what you believe you're capable of, and what you believe is possible. If your story is that you always struggle, then even when opportunities appear, you'll find a way to sabotage them to stay consistent with that identity. If your story is that you're destined for more, you will endure challenges with determination because the identity you hold demands a higher standard. Human beings will do almost anything to stay aligned with who they believe they are, even if that identity is hurting them. Because identity feels like certainty, and certainty feels like safety. But when your identity is built on old wounds, outdated beliefs, or the opinions of others, you end up living a life that doesn't belong to you. The moment you start questioning that story, the moment you challenge the idea that you must remain who you've always been, you open a doorway to transformation. Identity isn't fixed. It evolves every time you decide to redefine what something means. If you see a failure as proof that you're not enough, you shrink. If you see it as feedback, as a stepping stone, you grow. The story you choose determines whether you retreat or rise, whether you settle or stretch, whether you endure life or shape it. Changing your story isn't about pretending your past didn't happen. It's about choosing a meaning that empowers you instead of traps you. When you shift the narrative, your emotional state changes, your decisions change, and your behavior changes naturally because you're acting from a new internal foundation. People don't transform from the outside in, they transform from the inside out, starting with the identity they claim. The story you tell yourself becomes the story you live. And when you consciously rewrite that internal script, you redirect the entire trajectory of your life. Change happens the moment you decide you're no longer willing to live in your old narrative. Because transformation isn't born from perfection, timing, or external miracles. It begins with a single internal decision that you refuse to be defined by who you used to be. Most people wait for change to feel convenient or comfortable, but real change rarely arrives wrapped in ease. It begins in a moment of raw honesty, when you acknowledge that the story you've been living no longer matches the life you want to experience. This decision doesn't require massive resources, endless motivation, or anyone's approval. It requires a shift in your emotional threshold. There comes a point where the pain of staying the same becomes heavier than the fear of stepping into the unknown. And that tipping point is where personal revolution begins. The old narrative, whether it's rooted in fear, doubt, past failures, or inherited beliefs, loses its power the moment you declare you won't carry it forward. You take back authorship of your identity, and with that, the energy that once held you back becomes fuel for your next level. When you make this kind of decision, something changes physiologically and psychologically. Your mind starts searching for possibilities instead of limitations. Your body shifts from hesitation to movement, and your spirit reconnects with a sense of purpose that may have been buried for years. This decision becomes a line in the sand, a moment you can look back on and say, that's when everything started to change. It doesn't mean the path becomes easy instantly. It means you're no longer negotiating with your excuses. You stop asking whether you're ready and start acting like someone who's done being stuck. You stop replaying old stories of inadequacy and start writing new ones built on courage and choice. And because your brain is wired to follow what you commit to, that one decision begins reshaping your habits, patterns, and emotional responses. You begin aligning your actions with the person you've chosen to become, not the one you've been tolerating. People often underestimate the power of a decision because it feels intangible, yet every great transformation, from changing a career to healing a relationship to reclaiming your health, begins with that moment of inner defiance where you say, I'm done living this way. Once that decision is made, momentum starts building. You stop drifting and start directing. You stop reacting and start creating. And in that shift, change becomes not just possible, but inevitable. The power of focus is one of the greatest forces shaping your life, because whatever you consistently give your attention to expands and influences the direction of your thoughts, emotions, and actions. Most people don't realize that their mind is always focusing on something, whether consciously or unconsciously, and that focus becomes the seed of their reality. If your attention is dominated by fear, problems, or memories of what went wrong, your nervous system will stay in a state of limitation, causing you to hesitate, shrink, or doubt yourself. But when you direct your focus toward possibilities, solutions, and the future, to create, your energy rises, your creativity expands, and your behavior shifts to match the vision you hold. The mind cannot distinguish between what is happening and what you repeatedly imagine. It simply follows the commands of your dominant thoughts. This is why two people with the same goals can experience entirely different outcomes. One focuses on obstacles until they feel overwhelmed, while the other focuses on progress until they feel unstoppable. Focus influences your emotional state, and your emotional state influences the quality of every decision you make. When your focus is scattered, your energy weakens. When your focus is precise, your confidence strengthens. You begin noticing opportunities you once overlooked because your brain is wired to filter the world based on what you consider important. If you constantly tell yourself you're stuck, your mind will only show you evidence that supports that belief. But if you focus on growth, even the smallest wins begin to stand out, reinforcing momentum. The challenge is that life constantly tries to steal your focus with distractions, noise, and old habits pulling you toward familiar patterns. This is why mastering focus requires intention. You choose what you feed your mind each day. You choose whether to dwell on what you fear or what you want. You choose whether to replay past limitations or visualize the future you're committed to building. Once you take control of your focus, you take control of your emotional power. You begin acting with clarity instead of confusion, with purpose instead of pressure. And because focus drives behavior, the more you invest your attention in the story you want to live, the more naturally your actions align with that story. You start waking up with direction instead of drifting through your days. You begin feeling connected to your deeper goals instead of pulled by every distraction. And gradually your focus becomes the architect of a new identity, shaping not just what you think about, but who you become in the process. Emotional state is the foundation of transformation because everything you think, decide, and do is filtered through the emotions you are experiencing in the moment. People often believe that strategy or willpower is what changes a life, but without the right emotional state, even the best strategy becomes useless. When you're overwhelmed, fearful, or exhausted, your mind narrows, your options shrink, and you begin acting from survival instead of possibility. In that state, even simple decisions feel heavy, and habits that once supported you start falling apart. But when your emotional state shifts into empowerment, confidence, or determination, the world looks different. Solutions appear where obstacles once dominated, and actions that felt hard suddenly become natural. This is why 2 days can look identical in circumstances but feel completely different in outcome. It's not the day that changed, it's the state you brought into it. Your emotional state determines your level of resilience, creativity, resourcefulness, and belief in what's possible. If your state is weak, your story will always sound limiting. If your state is strong, your story becomes filled with options, strength, and clarity. This connection is why transformation must begin internally. When you shift your emotional state, you shift the meaning you give to your experiences. A setback becomes a lesson instead of a threat. A challenge becomes a chance to grow instead of a reason to quit. And the discomfort of change becomes fuel instead of fear. Human beings are wired to act in alignment with how they feel, and those feelings are influenced by focus, physiology, and the story they're telling themselves. Something as simple as changing your breathing, adjusting your posture, moving your body, or speaking with more certainty can interrupt patterns of doubt and activate states of power. Emotional master. Why isn't about avoiding negative feelings, it's about refusing to let them dictate the direction of your life. It means creating awareness of when you're dropping into a disempowering state and having tools to shift yourself back into strength. The more you practice shifting your state, the faster your mind and body learn to follow until it becomes second nature. And when your emotional state consistently supports your goals, every action you take becomes more intentional. You show up differently in conversations, in decisions, in challenges, and in opportunities. You stop reacting out of old wounds and start responding from clarity. You stop seeing yourself as a victim of circumstances and start recognizing yourself as the creator of your experience. Over time, the emotional states you choose become the identity you live from, and that identity becomes the engine behind a life that moves in the direction of your highest potential. Small, consistent actions aligned with a new story create massive, long-term change, because transformation is never about one dramatic moment. It's about the tiny choices you repeat until they become the fabric of your identity. Most people imagine change as a sudden breakthrough, a single burst of motivation, or an overnight shift, but real growth is built through steady, deliberate steps taken in the direction of who you want to become. Even the smallest action, when repeated consistently, rewires your beliefs, strengthens your confidence, and reinforces the new story you're choosing to live. When you act differently, even in small ways, your brain begins to accept a new identity, because behavior is one of the strongest signals of who you believe you are. If you take one step toward your goals every day, no matter how minor, your mind slowly stops identifying with the version of you that stayed stuck and starts identifying with the version that takes responsibility, moves forward, and refuses to settle. These little actions create momentum, and momentum is one of the most powerful forces in human change. Once you start moving, even gently, your energy rises, your clarity sharpens, and you begin craving more progress. The new story stops being something you say and becomes something you do. The challenge is that small actions often seem insignificant in the moment. Missing a day doesn't feel like a big deal. Doing 5 minutes of effort seems almost pointless, and tiny habits appear too small to matter. But compounded over weeks, months, and years, these micro actions separate the people who transform from those who stay trapped in their old patterns. Consistency creates trust within yourself. Each repeated action becomes evidence that you are committed, capable, and becoming someone new. The more evidence you stack, the stronger your belief becomes, and belief fuels even greater action. This cycle gradually turns effort into habit and habit into identity. Aligning your actions with your new story also eliminates the internal conflict that drains so many people. When you say you want change but act like your old self, you feel stuck, frustrated, and disconnected. But when your actions match your intentions, even in the smallest ways, you feel congruent and empowered. You're no longer wishing for change, you're building it. Over time, those seemingly small behaviors, choosing healthier foods, reading 10 minutes a day, practicing gratitude, making one bold decision, saying no to old patterns, accumulate into a transformation that feels massive. People will look at your life and assume something big happened, but you'll know it was the quiet, consistent, intentional steps that reshaped everything.